Someone needs to check on Australia and see if there are people still over there or if spiders and emus have finally united in an alliance and are just kind of operating the radio towers pretending that there are still humans running the country. And this movie proves we do need to send someone. In the events of the Red, or Rippy, in the United States, a creature begins stalking the borders of a town that only has one working officer for some reason. As animals begin to go missing and ultimately evidence is found that people have also gotten got, it becomes about trying to take out what is causing it. That said, there also is a communicable disease aspect that was a complete unknown at the time. So in today's episode, let's discuss the creature, what it contracted, and ultimately how it would go on to spread. But first, this episode is sponsored by Factor. If you've watched this channel for long enough, then you know I've lost like 30 pounds with Factor. With their fresh, never frozen, delicious meals, coupled with the fact that I could do the double protein route and still remain in a calorie deficit, this allowed me to build muscle and strength and lose fat, which, if you don't know, is incredibly difficult to do, but Factor made it that much easier. Double protein not your thing? With their 60 add-ons like breakfast, on-the-go lunch, snacks, and beverages, keto, calorie smart, vegetarian, and vegan, there really is something for everyone. I also like to do the protein shake option, as sometimes I just want to grab a pre-made bottle of protein and just snack on that, and that way I also know I'm getting an adequate amount of protein out of my meal. So if you want to enter your winter arc, as the youth say, then by going to factor75.com or clicking the link below and using code 50 Roanoke, you'll get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. That's 50 Roanoke at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. But as always, I want to thank you guys for watching. So the 20k like goal for Riddick was smashed, so we'll be doing that sequel. If you guys do enjoy this type of content, then leave a like, as it's a personal favor to me. And also come check out my gaming channel, Roanoke Games, if we have passed 30k subs. And don't forget to join Discord, where we watch movies every month, and then they end up here. Links for both of those in the description. We kick off our story with literally 12 production companies because it's Australia, and for some reason everyone wants to kick in 5 eucalyptus leaves, but they cannot fully fund the thing themselves. I mean, I get it, movies are quite expensive. Also, I'm pretty sure Australians use dollars just like we do. None of this quid pro quo currency the Brits are messing around with. I don't know what they're doing over there. We are now in the forests of Australia, which I wasn't really too aware of that those were out there. Like, I knew there were trees, but Australia is always depicted as either a desert or a city, which, remember, desert only has one S because you want less, but you always want more dessert, which has 2 S's. We are at a campground, ominously. Someone camping in a swamp, or a billabong as it's known, I suppose. There are health warnings about not entering the water, which, why is there a campground so close to the water then? As it pans over, we get to a tent covered in blood. And considering I'm going camping in a few days, stay strapped or get clapped. One guy is in there and he's torn up as a kangaroo growls. It says the Red, but again, in the US it's called Rippy. What an ominous name. Like, why Rippy? What even is that? Like, Skippy would make more sense considering they call the kangaroo later Skip. Questions that will remain unanswered. Flying over a small town, a woman then talks about how her old man was a hero. War hero, sport hero, local cop. Evidently he died young trying to save her. She has a lot of work to do to fill his shoes, her words not mine, which is always good when you want to live your life assuming that you are indebted to somebody. Won't make you a martyr in the slightest, so don't worry about it. As she drives through town, we jump over to a man with a couch out near a fire pit. A goat is eating some eucalyptus in the distance, and likely the whole place is being overrun by giant spiders. He sings a cadence to his quadruped as he walks over to whatever is making all the noise that he's currently hunting. Real Australian activities, except he's American, so USA baby. Also, you gotta remember, everything over here is trying to kill you and your dog, so staying strapped is kind of important. Sniffing the air, it evidently stinks. Raising man's answers to nature, the quadruped continues freaking out, and turning around, the man screams and fires a shot into something as the wolf attack sound from World of Warcraft sounds off, indicating that his dog did come to help him. Back in town, a woman does heroic work making a tractor stop so that Troy the runner can go by. She asks where her eggs are as a farmer tells her to just come on down to the farm and get them whenever she wants. Dude is not planning on delivering these. A shaggin' wagon then approaches next as the man from earlier, Schmitty, runs out telling Maddie about what he saw. A huge kangaroo, 7 feet tall, actually. Maddie then runs off thinking that he's crazy as Schmitty says he thinks it got Ralphie or something. Now either he's thinking the creature has Ralphie's or it got his dog Ralphie. I think it's probably the latter over the former, but it didn't really tell us what Ralphie was at the beginning. So over at a bar, Australians are being Australians, starting bar fights as Maddie then arrives to break it up. One kid then switches out his salad for fries. You ain't gonna get the gains that way, brother. The winter arc is upon us. Everyone then gets brought outside as the miners are told to just go home. YouTube mods. Miners that are mining. For the love of God, don't turn off my comment. So they head home as Maddie then talks to the bar owner about how Schmitty was just kind of showing up and how he was there talking about a giant roo, jumping over to the kangaroo. It's stalking the mining professionals. There we go. That's a better way of saying it. Hopefully that won't get me nuked from orbit. They are apparently walking home, and it's been like hours since they got sent home from the bar. Like, what is the deal with that? I mean, even a bike, which is short for bicycle, would be preferable to this. One of them then walks off to kind of just go bleed the lizard, as old eye patch here hears something. Which, legitimate question, I've heard being blind makes your other senses better, but would this count in the realm of making any of them better? Like, it's not even a joke. I'm inquiring, and inquiring minds wish to know. Looking around, everything goes completely quiet as they see some eyes up in the trees, which would be horrifying. Which, fun fact, typically when everything goes quiet around you, that means there is some sort of predator nearby. Remember that if you're ever in a jungle, it should just be ridiculously loud in there. If you hear nothing, it's time to spear up and go climb a tree. So P-Man gets pulled off into the woods first as old eye patch then goes to run, but gets grabbed and bitten, leaving strawberry jam everywhere all over the grass. So it is now the next morning. Maddie then heads out to a call where the two were attacked. Again, is there one cop in this town? Also, is that a Toyota? Excellent choice. I'm not 100% certain what sort of Toyota that is, but obviously, if you're gonna be driving around Australia with hopping deer that are evidently 7 feet tall, couldn't hurt to have an actual good vehicle. Although, we won't talk about what's happening with Toyota lately. You know, it's just, there's some problems. Anyways, checking under the tarp, Dave then came back looking for the men as they didn't come back to the mining facility. It is now 6 a.m. before he started looking, so really it could have happened at any point that night. Maddie then walks off to the other tarp, finding that, yep, that's only about a third of a man in there. They think maybe it was a croc or a pack of dingoes, which dingo ate my baby. It's unlikely though. They could have just easily climbed a tree. A crocodile could not have gotten to them anyways. It's not like they're exactly speed demons. Which, disclaimer, yes, they can run at about 6 miles per hour or up to 10 kilometers per hour in heathen units on dry land, but 6 miles per hour ain't exactly gassing it for our species, depending on where you are. Houston, Texas, being filmed for My 600-Pound Life, yeah, you're definitely getting eaten. But 2 random mining professionals in Australia, they could have outrun that thing. Anyhow, as they discuss what it could be, they then state that dingoes haven't even been seen here for decades though, which humanity, number one, pushing out the other predators, because this is our world. So, really, get good other species. Schmitty now approaches, rubbing his teeth. Alright then. He says he tried to tell them that the undead roo that cannot be killed did this. Looking at the tracks, it's clearly kangaroo. You know, because of all my hunting and tracking knowledge of kangaroos, considering I live in the southeast of the United States. Trust me, they're kangaroo prints. Also, bro, if y'all don't start believing Schmitty at some point in this movie, it's absolutely insane. Heading back to the funeral home, the bodies are lined up as an autopsy is about to be conducted. I don't believe this man has ever been to medical school, so I'm just gonna have to assume he just runs a funeral home. Confirming this, he says he's done the best he can, but it's not his cup of tea. Never is. He reports there's massive trauma, stab, slash, and rip, because the thing's name is Rippy. A bite on the neck also as well, which released a strawberry jam. The meat suits have been ripped up by something, he suggests. Ribs exposed, bite marks everywhere. What could it be? Probably not a 7-foot-tall undead kangaroo. So Maddie gets a call about a list concerning a man that she thinks is likely guilty. Ah yes, the old, you did it until proven otherwise tactic. Truly not the downfall of society. Evidently, he's taken people out in the past concerning manslaughter, which, fun fact, you can't spell manslaughter without saying man's laughter. Also, unironically, manslaughter sounds so much more horrific than murder. How did we settle on that being the least of the two? Anyhow, a man named Reuben Williams, who's Dave's new worker up at the mining facility, appears to be the target, so heading to the mining area, if he doesn't have an alibi, she's going to take him in. Going to talk to him, once again I must ask, is she the only cop in town? She asks him where he was last night, and he immediately says he wants his lawyer, and I mean, that is his right? Look, all I'm saying is, and it's just because I watch a lot of nonsense on YouTube about like police interrogations and kind of things like that. I was watching this one guy who the cops, like, first off, you have to understand cops are allowed to lie to you during interrogations, and they're allowed to lie to you so that they can get the information that they need out of you. There was this one guy who got stopped, and the cops were like, oh, okay, well, we stopped you and we brought you in for questioning because we have video evidence of you doing, I forget what it was. And the guy's like, well, that would be weird because I wasn't there. And they're like, well, we have video evidence. He's like, again, that would be weird because I wasn't there. And it turned into like this whole thing. So the point is that even when you're admitting something like that you did do, what it does is it locks you into a timeline. So if you forget like anything, that can come back to bite you even if you're innocent. Obviously, don't run around breaking the law. But the point is that never, ever talk. Just get a lawyer. Doesn't mean you're guilty. Doesn't mean there's a problem. Just get a lawyer. Today, hey, what am I here for? Oh, you're here because you stubbed your toe on the sidewalk and it broke some concrete, so we had to ask you about it. Sick! I want a lawyer. I'm just throwing that out there for you guys. Anyways, so she arrests him on the spot. I'm not really sure how the Australian legal system works, but I figured you need some sort of evidence to hold someone longer than a couple of hours. Habeas corpus and all that. Also, I don't know if you know what that is, but basically it's a fundamental constitutional right in the US, so obviously it doesn't go to Australia. But it makes it unlawful to just hold someone for extended periods of time in jail without actually charging them with anything. You have to actually show in court why this person's being held. So Maddie is happy with her lockup, saying he's been caught and everyone is safe, and she bases this on absolutely nothing. All the dude did was just ask for a lawyer. That doesn't mean he's guilty. Also, don't worry, we're getting to the murder ruse soon enough. So the bartender then tells her old man would be proud, as everybody assumes, well, we're all set. And then back at Maddie's house, again, her being the only cop, he's just sitting in an empty building alone. So Mr. Trackstar decides to go out on a run as he's been told it's safe out. I'm sure nothing will go horribly wrong. He then turns on his headlamp like a huge nerd, but really you should just run in the dark like a real Chad. Go caveman on it. So as he heads to the swamp, we see some teeth. An animal then screeches in the distance, and he hears something immediately, so he begins running faster. Remember, cardio kills. As it gives chase, it catches him quite easily, as his mom then spills meat fluid all over the table the moment he was attacked. Back at Maddie's house, because crime stops at 7 p.m., she looks through a photo album of her father. She has a traumatic memory and then starts to get a call. Whoa, not cool, guy. A woman then calls her saying she can't find Troy. She suggests something happened to her son. Maddie then heads out to go look for him, and approaching where the people were, they have found their son torn apart. Getting out of the only police vehicle in town, Maddie then hugs Troy's mother, as that's a bummer, as she's like, no, it's okay. Which, Papa Roanoke's advice here, whenever somebody dies, or like something tragic happens, don't tell people it's okay, because it's like you're just making them angry at that point because they're already like emotionally kind of disjointed, and then when you're like, no, it's okay, that thing you're feeling horrible about, it's okay, don't feel horrible about it. People might go caveman on you, so just be like, God, this blows. That's the best thing you can say. So anyways, mom then yells at Maddie saying, you told him it was safe. Stopping off at the Winchester for a pint, waiting for all this to blow over, the bartender then tells her that it was not her fault, and it's maybe sort of her fault. After all, she was already warned that was something else, but she ignored it to go after another guy who she assumed it was, sort of like ignoring a confirmation because it doesn't fit what you think it should be. Maddie then says maybe Schmitty is worth listening to, as he's the one who suggested this thing was basically a giant ruse in the first place. Bartender says it's worth putting together a hunting party for this thing, but not to believe him, because Schmitty's words are not to be trusted. His mind is damaged. Now bear in mind, this is his ex-wife, which I'm fairly certain. Mine probably says a similar thing about me, who knows? And we all know I'm a totally well-adjusted member of society. So maybe the bartender isn't as reliable of a person concerning what sort of action you should take, as she's too close to the issue with Schmitty. So there were tracks all around Troy, kangaroo tracks as we know them in the southeast, which, oh, now Schmitty is worth listening to, Maddie confirms. So heading to Schmitty, she enters his trailer without being invited in, which do Australians have constitutional rights like the US? I ask for the fourth time. I don't know. Looking around, she doesn't see him, but sees a picture of the bartender. Schmitty then comes in next, seeing her there. She asks about Ralphie and if he's actually seen him anywhere, and Schmitty rightly assumes more people have been taken out. So Maddie then hugs Schmitty as he tells her making decisions for people about people and anything with people without all the information is really tough. So she tells him that he's not seeing things clearly. Like, I'm not really sure why you showed up to his house to tell him he's not seeing things. Like, what was that even about? So he begins telling her about how he became friends with her dad. Like, they became friends over the beasts that Schmitty saw. He says they take on different forms. The beast was apparently what they were fighting out there, not actually the Vietnamese. So napalm was sent upon them and then they saw it. He suggests that they saw a dragon fly up and then spew fire at them. So Schmitty ain't batting 1,000 right now in the mental faculty department, it seems, but this is clearly a complex visual hallucination, but the question is why? Look, we gotta have some science in here at some point. The first part of this movie is really just murder mystery with us knowing it's a murderous kangaroo, but the problems will start happening shortly. Stress typically will exacerbate underlying mental illnesses, the big one being anxiety, tripping it off. Cortisol in high enough levels will actually disrupt cell function, neurons included. When this happens, your body will almost become hyperactive, dropping off small amounts of adrenaline into your system. Arguably, war would clearly cause a continued stress response. I don't think anyone would dispute that. So as the nervous system becomes hyperactive in some ways, depression may set in through prolonged stressed exposure because you will become depleted. And what is depression doing? Decreasing firing of neurons in certain areas of the brain, which, as we all know, if you've watched this channel for long enough, depression leads to hallucinations. People tend to think it's the other way around because you hear the phrase overactive imagination, but really, underactive communication leads you to see things that are not really there. Schmitty, due to the prolonged stress, which he would feel in Vietnam, which they confirmed it was from the war, caused an underlying mental illness that may not have been present initially to manifest fully, which has led to the chaotic state of his brain. Schmitty then tells her it'll change when she sees it, but he asks if that's truly what she wants to become. So the next morning, it's a bright and sunny day to hunt monstrous kangaroos. As they get ready to head out, the bartender is upset that Schmitty is there, and as they head out, their plan is to just sort of do patrols, but I'm not really sure they know where to find this thing. Like, I guess we'll all find out. So one group then breaks off to head towards the mine while the other just keeps going straight. Schmitty then makes some passes at bartender, classic, as then they stop to get out on foot to look around. As they walk, Schmitty tells Maddie that they are close to where her father died. Little out of pocket, and completely what a blunt force statement that was, but hey, it is what it is. Finding the health risk sign in the water, Schmitty then sees something as they head towards the bloody tent from the beginning. Kicking the tent, Schmitty and the bartender kept looking but see nothing. Maddie then pulls back the tent and finds that nobody is in there anymore. Schmitty calls out to Maddie as the bartender says something is out there but they don't see it. Meanwhile, Team Mining Truck has kept driving into the night. They have one headlight on that expedition and very likely they knew they were going out into the night. Like, why didn't y'all change that? Pulling the truck over, they also get out on foot as they found something out in the field. Moving through the barbed wire fence, they look at something that is just laying there. It is an eviscerated cow that is completely tore up, which usually indicates aliens. They surmise that it must have been dead for a while and it was moving when it was dropped. Dave says everyone needs to turn out their lights and keep the noise down. They start cracking jokes as Dave says he's worried about what can see them. Well, you guys are standing in the light of the truck like right now. Maybe just move a little bit back. So as everyone looks around, he tells everyone to be quiet and spread out, move in another direction, and then head back towards the truck. The men say, oh, well, we'll just kill it. Ah, yes, bravado. Back at Camp Crystal Swamp, the kangaroo continues to hiss. Schmitty says it has the smell of the beast, as the bartender says the billabong looks like it's growing. It's basically a nice chemical dump, which I'm certain that's not going to come up later as a major factor for this whole movie. Back at the dead cow farms, as they move, one man gets attacked and then he gets his sternum just straight up sliced. The other man then go to help, as then they find the kangaroo is eating him. Firing a bunch of shots into it, it does absolutely nothing, as one of the men gets kicked by the roo, evidently breaking several of his ribs, and as he hits the tree, very likely his spine. The woman then goes running off and then she gets hopped down by the kangaroo, which is a phrase I never thought I would use in my life. Dave then goes running back to the truck as the creature hasn't spotted him as of yet. However, as he's moving around, it begins making his way over to him as then he nopes out of there. As he does, however, the kangaroo begins attacking the truck because they can actually hop at 43 miles per hour, which sends him crashing into a eucalyptus tree. Surely, this is going to hurt the koala economy. The koala economy. Evidently, Maddie the bartender, I guess, heard this. She goes out to check on them, finding the truck has been flipped. The one headlight is then hanging on for dear life. Getting out, they find Dave is mortally injured, so being like told 100 times over that he's safe and them going, shh, stay with me, like he's bleeding to death. Which, fun fact, putting pressure on the wound or packing the wound with gauze in this case, a likely cloth, can prevent a bleed out. I'm not saying that they had everything at their disposal, but guys, do something. What a way to go out listening to a bunch of people being like, oh no, you're totally fine. Like, no, I'm actually bleeding to death. So Maddie and the bartender then hug it out while Schmitty watches as the two have a nice cry. Maddie for some reason then takes off her vest at this point, which I don't know why. I guess it's representing her going rogue, like Rippy has gone rogue. I don't know. Maybe just shred it to pack the wound. That would have been smart. Okay, so you know what? Look, I did EMT training. So before moving on, you never know what the future holds. The state of the world is absolutely wild. This could be useful information. Let's say that you have a wound bleeding. Maybe it's in the abdomen. Maybe it's in the chest. Well, the chest is going to be a little difficult, but maybe it's just the arm. You know, let's say you have a wound somewhere. So you have a pressurized side of the circulatory system and a lower pressure side, arteries and veins. So you have to find where the blood is flowing from, but not so much what it is flowing to. Found it? Fantastic. It's usually the thing spurting blood. If you have sterile gauze, that is preferable, but out in the wilderness or elsewhere, you might not always have it. So take strips of cloth that you do have from like a shirt or a bag or something. Then firmly place it into the wound, like keep your finger pressure and then feed it under your finger, or like basically fold it over on itself. And then you're going to continue to do this. While doing that, again, keep firm pressure on it. They will keep bleeding, but as you are packing the wound, eventually the pressure in the area is going to push on the bleeding vessel, preventing it from continuing to bleed. From here, continue to pack the wound until all the bleeding is stopped and keep pressure on it to keep it stabilized. Obviously now, you can call for help, but it's preferable to have someone else do it if you need to keep pressure on it. You can also have that person keep pressure on it if they are still conscious. If worse comes to worse and they can move, look, I'm not suggesting that you do, but slap some flex tape over that gauze and then wrap the wound pretty much as tight as you can to keep strong pressure on a packed wound. And now you know that this guy could have been totally saved. So she goes back over to the truck and has a nice flashback to her old man sitting with her at the swamp. Her dad then jumped in the water horribly and probably hit a rock or something. Like, for real, what was that jump? Which, no lie, I wrote this before I even really knew what happened. I'm an absolute genius. Bartender and Schmitty then get back telling Maddie that they are all dead. Maddie then starts saying they died because of her, my sister in Christ. How? They were adult men who made their choices, and there's a 7-foot-tall man-eating kangaroo in the loose. How is that you? Schmitty then says Maddie had nothing to do with her father's death. Schmitty finally says, you know what, you're misremembering everything. Spilling the spaghetti out of his pocket, he finally illuminates what happened as he says, your dad was drunk. He fell down, cracked his head open, and then bled out. He tells her the whole story doesn't even make sense what she believes, and the real version is what's going to set her free, which, by the way, the older you get, the easier it is able to bleed out from a small bump on the head as the vessels become less elastic. So make sure to protect your dome. So we get another flashback of her father drinking at the edge of the water. She now sees her dad staggering to get up as evidently he did fall. Well, that was really easy to recall. It seems like she would have definitely done that before, but hey, I just work here. Schmitty found Maddie as her dad was unconscious near the water, completely bleeding out. Schmitty then tells her the whole town just wanted to believe that her dad was a hero, not some drunk guy who jumped horribly into the water to save her because he was 12 Fosters deep and misjudged a giant rock in front of him. Sometimes it's easier to believe a lie than to face the horrible truth. Well, after that heartfelt intervention, Kangaroo Jacked begins attacking the car. The kangaroo then breaks through the glass, going after Schmitty, as I think this thing literally bites his rifle in half, as Maddie then pops it in the face a few times. So now that we've actually seen this thing, man, it took forever to really show itself in a clear light. Let's discuss its outward presentation of symptoms, which will shed light internally on what may be happening. Starting with the feet, we see that this is a regular kangaroo foot. It's just a large red kangaroo. This specific subspecies of marsupial can grow up to 8 feet tall, actually, which is around 244 centimeters, which I'm told the rest of the world uses for height in their heretical measurement system. F's in the chat for the rest of the world, boys. Red kangaroo can also get up to around 200 pounds, and at that height, which actually is relatively tall for a 90-foot tall animal, that's gonna be around 90 kilograms. At my heaviest, I was actually 25 pounds heavier than an 8-foot tall kangaroo. All I can say is thank God for Factor. I'm not even joking. I'm down to I was at 175, I'm at 185. Technically at my heaviest, I was at 225. So at one point I lost, what is that? Like 50 pounds? Now it's just back down to 40, but more muscle. So now the thing about kangaroos is they're quite muscular animals and are absolute swole goals when they flex. But they also possess relatively good countermeasures and a formidable level of intelligence. Now, if you ask an Australian, I guarantee they know in their hearts that these animals are dumb. And this is why the ARB bumper was invented, to prevent kangaroos from ruining your truck. That said, kangaroos do sport some level of intelligence that is quite interesting. First, if you ever see a kangaroo in the water, do not approach it. They like to grab animals and drown them during fights. Second, kangaroos know almost how to fight man as man fights. We all saw that one kangaroo choking that one guy's dog and then he went up and punched it in the face. Luckily it worked because typically kangaroos will actually grab you and then use their feet to kick, which can break ribs and other bones. Along with this, they have a large middle claw that can be used to eviscerate their competitor and basically just inflict mortal wounds on humans. Along with that, kangaroos also have claws in their hands as well that they can slash with, but I just feel like a kangaroo absolutely would throw hands like a boxing match if they just had more interactions with humans. We need to teach kangaroos how to box. Why? I don't know, it would just be fun. Now, this particular kangaroo, as mentioned, is a red kangaroo, 7 feet tall, and has the average build of a kangaroo of that size, and still has claws. However, something is obviously very different about it. Lead dispensed straight to the dome no longer takes it out. However, there is a caveat to all of this. In some areas of its body, it's been hit, like in the arm or the abdominal area, but as far as we know, these were just glancing blows. Even the lead to the face damaged its skull, but the brain appears to still be intact as it was not shot in the center of its head. So far, the shots that have hit it wouldn't necessarily have caused enough damage to put it down. So it's not immortal, the shots just haven't been placed well enough. And judging by what we will see later, the eyes being milky white, this indicates an extreme level of damage, which we will also see later, and it's clear why. It would also seem as though pain is not a deterrent, indicating that while the motor neurons are still innervating and pushing the muscular tissue into movement, the sensory neurons themselves appear to have been suffering critical issues, meaning the kangaroo is essentially numb to everything. So now the question becomes survivability. We see the blood is still red, meaning the heart is beating and the blood is properly perfused with oxygen. Otherwise, it would be dark blue. And this would indicate that cellular metabolism is still quite present, meaning that despite it basically having this outward damage, the body itself is still alive at its most basic level. And this would indicate that this is an infection and not a level of undeath. Now, here's the bad news. At the very end, like the tippy top of the end, in the literal credits, it tells us what happened to this thing. So stick around for the actual explanation as to what's going on. Don't leave. Don't do it, you giant nerd. I mean, you might find it interesting. So taking off, the kangaroo then hangs out at the other truck for a moment as Maddie then turns around. Having an ARB bumper, which again is what Australians famously built to deal with kangaroo collisions, Maddie goes to hit it as it takes off. She misses it like entirely as she heads into a field and then crashes the one working vehicle into a eucalyptus tree. Smart. That's the thinking ahead that built this great nation. So Schmitty then goes to check the perimeter as bartender keeps saying she's sorry. Schmitty then comes over saying there's no sign of the creature as Maddie realizes she shot it, but it didn't die. So this pretty much proves Schmitty correct on all counts. The vehicle is trashed, so now they gotta hoof it out of there. Schmitty says they lost it for a while, which I'm not sure what he bases that on, but then they head to Schmitty's place to seek shelter. We've seen it flip vehicles, but can it flip a trailer? Probably. Heading inside, it's home sweet home for the bartender as she sees a picture of herself that is still up. They ask if Schmitty's car is going to work after insulting it, which is what all of my friends do to my cars. Just because they're junk doesn't mean they won't work. Schmitty then says he has the keys, but that's not the problem. The battery died on its way back to town. The battery is on its charger outside, but nobody wants to head out there. Maddie says they are going to need backup. Like who? You're the only cop, I'm pretty sure. Maddie says that she will go outside and then start the generator. So heading into the velociraptor grass, bartender then keeps snooping around Schmitty's house, asking if she still thinks about them, which probably not, but he says he still thinks about the bartender every day. So this man is bringing the absolute heat and is about to court his ex-wife. Maddie, meanwhile, is looking into the abyss and sees nothing. Where is this generator at? Continuing her slow walk through, Schmitty and bartender then talk about random stuff, as bartender says Schmitty was running for the adrenaline highs, and that's why he would never stick around. Now, we were getting like a crazy divorce subplot in this. Bartender then lost her brother in the war, and then after, she lost him. So they reconnect, and man, I hope a kangaroo attack doesn't happen right now. So they hold hands as we jump back over to Maddie. Finding the generator, like literally 12 miles away, she hears a bark in the distance. Ralphie then comes running up after having been missing for like over a week as she starts back up the generator. Getting the lights flipped on, they then call out on the radio as Maddie begins her run back. Calling the hotel, nobody can hear her as Schmitty then exits the trailer, hearing his dog. Maddie then goes to get the battery next as Schmitty goes to get the bartender. She has made contact with somebody at the hotel as the kangaroo has found the goats. Heading to the van, Maddie then gets the battery in as everyone loads up. Getting the battery connected just in time, the kangaroo then hops around back, going after Maddie, as then she takes another pot shot at it before they take off. Getting back into town, Maddie seems upset for some reason, entering the place as the dog barks. I'm not really sure why she just wouldn't announce her presence. Everyone then looks at her as she says it's a massive kangaroo that is attacking everyone. A man asks where everyone else is as she reports they are in fact all dead. Schmitty then heads outside as she sees the roo entering the town. He calls out telling everyone that it's here as it enters the town from the end of the street. Man, this thing really is gigantic. They all then head back inside as this basically becomes the movie Feast now. I still need to actually cover the sequel for that. You know what? I'm doing it live. 40,000 likes and I'll cover Feast 2. So they barricade the doors, but I don't think it's gonna matter to a creature that large. So using everything they got to put in front of the door, the roo has disappeared. Seeing a police truck roll down the way, I can't believe it. It's another cop. He gets out of his vehicle as then they call out to him, but he can't hear any of them. So I guess there are two cops in town. Maddie then tells him to get back in his car as he turns around and sees the roo, and he's like, "Evening, Skip." That's a little bit more British, but anyways, it starts eviscerating him, so I guess that's the end of the backup. The kangaroo now approaches the hotel as it begins trying to break in as everyone starts freaking out, as one does. The patrons then run for cover, leaving just Schmitty, bartender, and Maddie as he put Ralphie up as well. Maddie begins saying she's been thinking about her dad and how she was carrying this weight, but really, he was just hammered. The hinges begin breaking on the door as bartender says she was wrong to lie about Murray, telling her she keeps trying to pay a debt that she doesn't owe. Maddie now says she has a plan. As they go to brace the door, dude, Maddie has got some serious veins in her arm. She says she's going to blow its brains out. The Roo then breaks in, looking around for them, and having gotten into the kangaroo, it begins sniffing around for them, but can't find them. As it hops, it still can't find anyone as Schmitty goes to get a bat from underneath the bar top. Heading to the other side, he then throws it to get the Roo's attention as the dog starts barking, alerting the Roo of where everyone else is. Maddie then looks at a picture of her old man as the bartender then tells her it's not worth it. Like, what, her job? Leading it away from people? She then fires a bunch of shots into it as it squares up on her. Taking aim, she hits it in the face as its eyeball then falls out. Bartender then hits the bell as Maddie grabs an axe and starts going at it. Hitting it several times, it finally closes its eyes. Like, bro, triple and quadruple tap that thing. Feeling like they killed it, everyone then comes out looking at it as Ralphie starts sniffing around it. Maddie then launches into an explanation saying her old man isn't perfect, but he did love her. Not really sure what that has to do with killing a giant kangaroo, but we now jump over to the funeral home. The bodies are gone, and this is very clearly an infection of some kind, with the kangaroo having been the original vector. The funeral home director is then attacked, as thus concludes Rippy, or the Red, depending on where you live. Except, the credits show what actually happened to this thing. The kangaroo was injured in a fight, it went to drink the water, and eventually it fell down dead, but was reanimated by what it drank, becoming a carnivore as it attacked the original man at the campgrounds, which now thus concludes Rippy. So now that we know what happened to this and the infectious outbreak happening at the end, let's talk about that for a moment and figure out what is really happening here. The kangaroo, having been injured and bleeding, appears to have gone for a drink of water, exposing itself to something beyond just chemical. And this is where we can almost see where its survivability comes from. Upon dropping to the ground, I find it unlikely that it completely died, but instead its blood pressure went so low, it could not properly perfuse the dermis, and so its sensory neurons were the first to go. Now, take this with a grain of salt because it could have also died, given that what we see from the funeral home, obviously, those people got back up, and like they were missing lungs and a heart, so bit interesting. But anyways, it's sort of like like when your nerves die, it's sort of like something called Saturday night palsy, which if you weren't aware of what that was, basically, let's say you drink some beer and then you fall asleep on a Saturday night having your arm in a really weird position. Well, you can end up killing those nerves, making you have to go to rehab for it. There was either it was a guitarist or a drum person, like somebody in some band that's super famous, they had that issue too, where they had Saturday night palsy. Not a great time. So take care of your nerves, they're pretty easy to kill. But this sensory nerve destruction would have rendered the creature almost supernatural, as it literally cannot feel the damage you are causing to it, so it just doesn't stop. Sort of like the dude hopped up on PCP, they don't feel pain, so they just kind of survive stuff that seems otherworldly. But this perfusion issue would have other consequences. It's clear the eyes would have not been adequately supplied with oxygen either, causing them to turn a milky white, indicating pretty severe damage. The retinas appear intact still, as the creature can see, but the vision itself is tunneled and veins can be seen, also indicating the retina is likely damaged, which is arguably the most clear violation of typically how kangaroos act, and this is going to be the meat-eating aspect. We know kangaroos can be quite aggressive if they want to be. There's one guy I was watching who was on a parachute. A kangaroo literally watched him fall out of the sky, hopped towards him, like, I don't know, 100 yards away, and then just attacked him. But eating meat shouldn't be a thing with these creatures, right? Well, not necessarily. Herbivores get this rap that is pretty strange, like they are some friendly animal that would never harm you. No, herbivores have to contend with predators who are carnivores, and they're downright ruthless. Their food of choice just isn't meat, usually. So it's not a complete shock that this kangaroo would actually eat meat. It happens quite a bit in the eat or be eaten world. Horses will occasionally eat chicks that are nearby, squirrels have dragged pigeons off to their burrow to snack on them, and even kangaroos have occasionally been seen eating birds. And this is not like an opinion thing, this is documented, there's video evidence of it. The reality is, while uncommon, it's not impossible for a herbivore to eat meat, they just typically don't hunt it. However, if it's right in front of them, and let's say that animal's dumb and they are hungry, they might just eat it. So I believe with Rippy, this is in fact the case due to the potential neurological damage that it has suffered. Upon dropping, the blood pressure going low enough to not properly perfuse several parts of the body, like the brain specifically, and with that, the cerebrum, this would take a hit, and this would drop the kangaroo down to an even more basic level of survival, making it pure instinct. While plants are plentiful for this creature, animals were still on the menu as well, and that said, we cannot fully just ignore the infection that broke out, which obviously did reanimate two humans who were very clearly dead. So those that were bitten by Rippy had this infection spread to them as well, but what exactly is it? Taking into consideration that the Roo drank water from the world's most hazardous swamp with hazardous chemicals in it, which hazardous chemicals was written on the tanker at the very end, this was presumably being dumped into the water, and I would be inclined to believe that the chemicals created an environment of unnatural pressures for different forms of life to contend with. One specific form of life is one that I'm thinking of, and this is basically how many protists exist within swamps. Being the biggest contender for all of us, I would imagine they would have to survive in waters with viruses, in turn attempting to infect and replicate. And maybe that the chemicals altered the protists so wildly that the viruses in turn had to adapt, and with each subsequent infection, the viruses became more chaotic as well. And this was not an all-at-once ordeal either, given how old that sign was, and this was like an ongoing dumping ground, slowly changing the eukaryotic protists, and then that would result in changing the viruses as well. This would create something able to adapt faster than usual. I believe the Roo drank this virus-laden water that would then go on to invade the cells of the Roo. And what highlights this specific version of the virus is its own adaptability. I mean, it was able to jump species from Roo to man after biting, which that is not easy to do. So given like the drooling, the aggressiveness, I want to say it's rabies. Because it comes from the water though, and not from another animal, rabies is just, it dies so fast in water. It's absolutely insane. So I would have to say it's a virus that mimics rabies-like symptoms, which means it has to affect the brain. So what is living in the water that would allow for a virus to replicate like this and would then be able to survive the water and then could infect the Roo and then go on to humans? Well, it matters very little what sort of protists are basically becoming the breeding ground. However, what I hope it infected the most of and destroyed it is Naegleria fowleri, or the braiding amoeba. I might have pronounced fowleri wrong. It's fowleri or fowleri. Not sure which, but that I hope that was just getting totally wrecked. But it is likely an adenovirus that in turn would be altered, which would then go on to infect the eukaryotic cells of an entirely different animal quite regularly. So what is an adenovirus and what does it do? Glad you asked. Upon contracting an adenovirus, typically your body will just clear the infection. However, if it moves to the brain, this can cause acute necrotizing encephalopathy, where the brain swells, bleeds, and then dies. Meningitis is also on the table, which as we all know, is inflammation of the meninges surrounding the spinal cord and brain, causing pressure to build and then tissue death, usually in the brain. Encephalitis, where your brain just swells and you guessed it, dies. Basically, swelling is the name of the game and your brain is not having a great time. But upon this happening, any animal can be made more aggressive. And let's say like the amygdala is affected by the pressure applied, this can increase those aggression levels, and let's say this is coupled with frontal lobe damage, emotional control then goes out the window. Brain damage can also affect what food the creature goes after, as well as, which is of great interest is clearly, the people being affected would in turn presumably eat one another. The area of the brain affected would likely have been the hypothalamus as well. Usually this is going to be like, the more basic components of your brain are going to be damaged. So what do I believe took place? Well, the Roo, upon being injured and bleeding, went to go drink water. It was already circling the drain at this point. Upon drinking it, it would imbibe the adenovirus, which would have been mutated to a degree, basically to become much more aggressive, causing it to be immediately infected. Now, from here, on a cellular level concerning genetics, what happened? It's possible that when the virus enters the body itself, it may affect the actual mitochondria of the cell, which is the powerhouse of the cell, because for this creature to survive, essentially flatlining out, and then other humans to be able to be infected, flatlined out, and then get back up. This is gonna basically require them to be able to run on an anaerobic metabolism, which means lack of oxygen, their body still breaks down glucose more efficiently to form ATP. Right now, I think the aerobic respiration of our cells gives, I believe, 36 ATP, whereas anaerobic gives us 2 and a ton of lactic acid. So something about the actual cellular metabolism would have to change in order for those cells to survive post-mortem and then get back up.
From here, the virus would also damage the brain, as if it's not a perfect system and you're not getting as much ATP, definitely neurons are going to be dying inside of the brain anyways. So this might be the cost of having an anaerobic metabolism where you can basically still oxygenate the blood, but not enough nutrients is sent to the brain. So when the heart rate and blood pressure dropped, this obviously caused issues. The sensory neurons would then die, and eventually it would get back up after what would basically be a coma, with the creature breathing on its own, or at least the cells turning anaerobic. It's clear the viral infection caused the brain to bleed and die in some capacity, increasing aggression and potentially altering its choices of food. Had someone got a direct shot into it, as I believe it likely would have died, as I don't believe the essentially control center of the body has really changed all that much. Like, the brain is very clearly still piloting the body. The infection would come later, and it would be caused by this adenovirus, which is, again, native to swamps anyhow and invades protists, so it knows its way around eukaryotic cells, which in turn would cause the infection of man to be more aggressive and then bite one another, further spreading the virus. This movie is probably just a prequel to the movie Cargo, which I have covered if you guys want to see that. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. Do you think this is just a supernatural zombie kangaroo infection? Or do you think it's something a little more corporeal that could basically be rectified? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed, then leave me a like, as always is appreciated, as it gets the video out there, and subscribing lets you know occasionally when I post. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Roanoke Games, Roanoke Tales channel link, as well as Patreon. But speaking of patrons, I'll thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our astrophysicist, Death Dancer, and Feather. Thank you guys. Next, I'd like to thank our scientists, Eris Dakota 23, Invictus Echo, Lucian Dragon, Metric System, Official Texan, and Virix Hellstrom. Thank you guys as well. And the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate y'all, as your help goes a long way towards keeping everything running smoothly. Also, check out my merch. The Halloween merch is going away soon, and Christmas merch should be posted here relatively soon as well. But all right, that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll see y'all in the next one.